So in today's video, we're going to talk about the best methods for first responders and service providers to reduce stress while providing care for their communities. Very, very important. This is the main niche of my practice in Coral Springs, is providing quality care and therapeutic services for my first responders and my service providers. So for first responders and service providers, stress is inevitable. And this month, we're talking all about stress and burnout. So first responders and service providers definitely deal with a lot of stress because they deal one-on-one with the community and helping and trying to care for them as much as they possibly can. And one of the things that service providers and first responders do while on the job, they definitely do not put their needs or emotions first as the priority. They always think of the other person that they're trying to help. And in execution and helping their community, they have to utilize critical thinking skills, logic, and sometimes make really quick, sound decisions. And you can't really do that typically when you're heightened emotionally. It kind of like does not work when you're trying to make good logic decisions if you're stressed out or overwhelmed or completely 100% emotional. So my first responders and my service providers constantly have to stay emotionally regulated and composed at the job, which can be very hard to do, and it can be very exhausting to keep that type of discipline in check in order to do your job effectively. Due to the nature of the job, putting themselves last is something that they definitely do. Because they do this, they just might not understand just how stressed they are. So I'm going to give you some basic education and foundations as why managing stress is so vital for your health, not just for first responders and service providers, but for the general population in general. I think it's really important to kind of hone in and really get educated on this foundational work. We know in the previous videos and what we've been talking about in general that long-term stress can definitely affect you negatively, both physically and mentally. And the first thing that we have to do is recognize the stress that we're feeling before it becomes overwhelming. And this is typical with my first responders and my service providers, is because they don't think of themselves, because they think of themselves last on the totem pole. Recognition of the stress needs to happen before you become overwhelmed. So oftentimes we end up automatically going down this stress rabbit hole, and we end up in a pool of feeling anxious, panic, overwhelmed, and we have no idea how we even got there because the lack of recognition that takes place. So recognition of stress before it becomes overwhelming is key. When I speak to my first responders, particularly my law enforcement officers, my firefighters, my nurses, my nurse managers, the critical incident occurs for first responders and service providers. What needs to happen is the agency or upper management needs to do some type of debriefing of the incident. And then you have your peers there that may have been exposed to the same type of trauma and stress that you were. So that is called peer counseling, where you lean into your same professionals that are there kind of coping and stressing in the same familiar way. And then there's also professional help that will reduce stress and trauma, which is definitely destigmatized and definitely now becoming more and more accepted as we go through our stress and our trauma in a general population. So let me teach you some ways that stress and burnout can be alleviated. A lot of people's philosophy is that if I think of myself first, then I must be selfish. I want to just scratch that philosophy right off the get-go. Putting yourself first is not selfish, it's about self-care. You know, we don't do this as first responders or service providers, and we don't really do this if you're a parent. You don't put yourselves first, but you got to put yourself up there a little bit more. So that's really important to kind of understand. And these are just some ways I think that have helped me and have helped my clients deal with their stress and burnout, such as like processing in a journal. A lot of people, they internalize a lot of stress and a lot of trauma, and maybe they don't feel at first being comfortable speaking to a therapist or talking to anybody, but getting it out is very important as an outlet. So processing in a journal can be super helpful. You don't necessarily have to save it. You can rip it up, you can burn it, but getting it out is the key. Meditation is another form of self-care that can be promoted to reduce stress. So practice with meditation. I have not yet mastered meditation. My mind kind of wanders off and I have to redirect my mind. Most of the time when I do a meditation practice, all I'm doing is redirecting my mind. So it's hard to kind of learn correctly how to do it where you're feeling calm in a Zen state, but it takes practice. Another thing that is about self-care is developing a supportive network, formally or informally. And when we talk about formally, we're talking about professionals that are there to help you. And we're talking about informal, we're talking about friends, acquaintances that are there to have your back. A quality relationship, a quality person in your life to kind of lean into, and they lean into you in reciprocation. Another part of self-care, which I think is super important, is intentional respite. We hustle and we bustle every single day. And so having that intentional respite is going to be really important for you to take some time just to rest, not necessarily sleep or not necessarily like doze off or nap, but just quiet time for yourself to kind of be alone, be silent, no distractions, no dog barking, no phone ringing, not scrolling, just intentional respite so you can kind of feel kind of like a sanctuary, kind of safe and silent, if you will. Another part of self-care that I think that I've been trying to master myself is creating an AM and PM routine that is consistent. Try to be as consistent as possible. Now I know sometimes it's hard to be as consistent as we want to be because from day to day, sometimes our days don't always look the same. So try to stay consistent as much as you possibly can, not deviating so far off where you're not doing a routine anymore, but try to keep consistent as much as you can. And an AM routine and a PM routine can kind of help you stay on track. And when you don't do something like a walk, if you do an AM routine in the morning, you feel something's missing when you don't do it. So it's pretty important to kind of be routine and regimented and self-disciplined when creating these routines. Another thing that I want to talk about, which really I want to talk about when it comes to my first responders, particularly my first responders and my service providers, is talking to a professional is no longer taboo. And for first responders and service providers, it's really, really important that we become more accepting of talking to somebody in the mental health field. You see a lot of things that normal people don't see and we're not privy to. So, and it's all trauma-based and it's all anxiety-ridden and very, very stressful. So talking to a professional and service provider for service providers is no longer taboo. It may have been in the 80s, maybe some in the 90s, but now our mental health is at the forefront and we really need to kind of break that taboo. And I would encourage that if first responders in cities, agencies, municipalities, hospitals, schools, and other organizations need to start putting their employees' mental health priority, and is super progressive of breaking the stigma of talking to a professional. So if your city's not doing this, if your agency's not doing this, if your municipality, hospitals, schools are not doing this, then I would really have a conversation, a candid conversation with somebody in upper management to really start promoting taking care of mental health for their employees. Some cities in my area are really progressive about doing it, and they're right in line, and it makes the employee feel that they are being taken care of and they're being valued when their mental health is being considered. So this is kind of like an overall brief, little bit of a summary of how stress and burnout can be alleviated by not selfishness, but self-care, and what first responders kind of go through and why it's so important when you are helping the community to get help yourself. My name is Dr. Michelle Finneran, and I'm here to help you. Please reach out to me on my website below. Thanks, guys.